Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about. We're on the unit on the revolution today. Everything's about to hit the fan. All right. So we've been talking about the Boston Massacre, tensions rising in the colonies against England. Today's it, man. Today we're going to talk about what causes the war between the 13 colonies, little peon colonies, all right, with no standing military, and the most powerful country on earth. All right. That's what we're going to talk about today. Super cool. All right. So the story today is going to, I would say start, but it really just picks up from where we were leaving off yesterday, is these taxes. All right. These taxes that are getting put on the colonies are very disrespectful to the colonies. That's how the colonies are perceiving it. The taxes are from the French and Indian War because England needs more money. England feels like the colonies should have to pay all this extra taxes since England defended the colonies from the French and the Indians. All right. The colonies didn't view it that way, but regardless, the colonies are being forced to pay these taxes. The colonies are really frustrated about the fact that they have no say-so over these taxes. They're just being put on them. All right. So the argument, no taxation without representation, is kind of a rallying cry at the time. The taxes continue to increase and cause more hostility. Now, there is this one here called the Tea Act. Now, we're in 1773. 10 years now, there's been tension. Ever since the proclamation of 1763, which just said they can't cross the Appalachian Mountains, from that point on, salutary neglect has been over. And England is going to enforce their laws here in the colonies, and the colonies, in their rebellious nature, not a big fan of it. So, we are now in 1773. The Townshend Acts have already come out and put a tax on tea. People in America, in the colonies, drank tea. Just like they do in Britain, it is very common to drink tea. It is just a part of society to drink tea. All right? And we're talking about hot tea, not like sweet tea on ice. So, not only is there already a tax on tea people are squirrely about, then the Tea Act comes out in 1773. The Tea Act gives this company here, the British East India Company, all right, the sole right to sell tea in America, in the colonies. I keep saying America colonies, you know what I'm saying. So the reason this ticks off the colonists is when there's 5 or 6 different companies coming from England selling tea over here, they all had that same tax on it, okay? But since they have to compete with each other, none of them can, before the tax, jack up their price. Now England has allowed the British East India Company the only license to sell tea in the colonies. So not only is there a tax on it already, the British East India Company, since they have a monopoly now, which is a British company, it's East India because Britain owns India. Has a lot of colonies in India, so that's the connection, how India and Britain are the same thing here. So the British East India Company comes over to America and the colonies, and they're going to jack up the price of their tea before you even add on the extra tax. All right? This really infuriates the colonists. I mean, it's just a jerk move. Why would you give the British East India Company this leverage? Anyway, so the colonists are furious over it. So the colonists are so mad about this, their big old ship comes in carrying goods from the British East India Company into the harbor of Boston. It goes to the docks. It has millions of dollars worth of tea on it. So basically all the tea comes in through Boston and then gets distributed along the colonies. The colonists say, how much are you going to sell that tea for? To the representatives from the British East India Company. And they're like, shut up, don't worry about it. Or they told them the price and the colonists thought it was way too high. So there's like a group that refuses to let the British East India Company unload their ship. So it's just sitting there in the harbor of Boston. And again, Boston is the heart and soul of the Patriots, people who want to be independent from England. So it's just going to sit there with millions of dollars worth of tea leaves sitting on that ship because the people won't let it come off the ship because they're not happy with the current situation with the British East India Company, the taxes, and the prices that the British East India Company are charging for it already. So they're like, fine, until this gets dealt with, it'll just sit on the ship. So it sits there for about a week on the ship, and I'm guessing there's some backroom conversations with somebody. I don't think anything's really happening as far as changing prices or anything like that. So, group of guys at a bar getting drunk. This is like the second story that starts out in American history with that, and that we have talked about here. I would imagine quite a few stories start out like that. So here's the conversation that must have taken place in this bar with these guys that are in this bar drinking. And I imagine they're looking out a window and they can see this ship just sitting out there. It's an empty ship filled with all these tea leaves. Guys like, hey, you know what would be a good idea? What if we just went and destroyed all that tea? I'd show them. And then all the guys next to him would be like, yeah, that'd be awesome. We should do that. But, I mean, that's really going to get you in trouble. Like, that's like almost treason. That's millions of dollars. That's more money than our whole city would ever see. Like, you can't go do that. Like we would get in trouble and we'd be put in prison forever. And they're like, yeah, but what if it didn't catch us? He's like, well, yeah, but everybody can see the harbor. So how would we possibly not get caught and not be seen? And this guy raises his hand in the back. Who's on? I imagine Sam Adams is here. He may not be, but this seems like such a Sam Adams scenario. What's going to happen here, which is going to eventually be called the Boston Tea Party. But here's a guy in the back, unknown guy's like, got an idea. This guy, man, I wish we knew who he was in history, because this is the dumbest idea that I know of that worked. He's like, hey, here's how we can do it and not get caught. What if we put on disguises? And they're like, yeah. Well, what are we going to disguise ourselves as? He's like, Indians. So they're like, yeah, this seems like a great idea. In Morgan Freeman narrator voice, it was not a good idea. I mean, I say that, but it's going to work. The reason this is funny is they're going to dress up as Indians, but they're not going to do a good job of it. They're going to put like feathers in their hair, like pigeon feathers. They're still wearing like their khaki pants that they would be wearing out to the bar. They're like covering themselves in dirt, like war paint. Not a good job. And all these drunk guys run out from the bar dressed as the world's worst Halloween Indians you've ever seen. They go storm this ship and they take all these boxes of tea, all right, and they dump it overboard. Now, as soon as the tea leaves hit salt water, they're instantly ruined. There's no salvaging it. And they dump all of these tea leaves into the harbor. Millions of dollars of tea from the British East India Company is ruined. The entire town, now it's in the middle of the night, but the entire town shows up to watch us from the dock. I got a drawing of it here. So this is Indians, and these look like more convincing Indians than how these drunk guys had dressed up, throwing it into the harbor as there's like a ton of people here watching this happen and cheering them on. They dump all the tea in the harbor. They run off the ship and get away before the redcoats show up to stop them from doing it. All right. So the question is, what is the Boston Tea Party? Where they're just throwing this into the ocean. And then why did the colonists do what they did? All right. So now is when I want you to go ahead and go answer that question based on what you know, because we're going to talk about the consequences of it. So the reasoning for doing this, we've already talked about, of why they thought they should do this to get back at the British East India Company. Explain that, and then we will move on. So here's what's crazy about this. Because here's the question, all right? So everybody saw this happen. Everybody, I mean, they're not very good disguises. All of these people here who saw it know what happened to these guys. So the next day, the redcoats are like, all right, who did it? And nobody says a word. It's like, oh, y'all better tell us, you're going to be in trouble. Nobody says a word. They start offering big rewards for whoever turns these people in. Nobody says a word. The entire city of Boston doesn't snitch. Like, all of these people right here, everybody knows who it was. Everybody does. They're like, it looks like Indians to me. The fury that Britain, this is millions of dollars, all right, that Britain, through the British East India Company, has lost. They are furious at this. Not only this, the fact they lost the money, but Boston is like, guess we'll never know. The mystery continues. Let's go find those Indians. You know, like real tongue-in-cheek. Everybody knows what happened, but nobody will say anything. They kept a secret so well, nobody wrote it down. Like, nobody in their journal was like, it was Billy. We don't actually know, present day, who was on this ship and who actually did this. Because they're all just played dumb. The entire city was like, oh, no idea. In my mind, in the way my mind likes to make nice, neat little narrative stories that never actually fit that nicely together in real history. But in my mind, I like to imagine that Sam Adams was one of these guys. If he was there, he 100% would have been the guy that came up with it. I don't know if he would have been the guy that's like, hey, let's dress as an Indian. But regardless, the Boston Tea Party here is going to have fundamental impacts on American history. All right. Because England is furious. So England is going to, I'll get to a map here and explain this. So the next year, 1774, we're 2 years from 1776, which is when everything hits the fan. England is furious. Here's what England says. Until, if y'all won't tell us who did it, fine. We'll punish the whole city. And England passes a group of laws called the Coercive Acts. Now, they are officially called in England the Coercive Acts. If you're trying to coerce somebody to do something, you're trying to force them to do something, manipulate them to do something, aggressively negotiate with them. You're trying to coerce somebody into doing something. So England calls these the Coercive Acts because these laws that we're getting ready to talk about, their goal is to get Boston and the colonies to pay back all the money that got thrown into the harbor. All right, all the money lost by the British East India Company when those colonists dressed as Indians threw all that tea into the harbor. All right, that is the goal here, and they're going to call it the Coercive Acts. So there's a whole bunch of not fun things for the colonies that are getting ready to exist, and England calls them the Coercive Acts. The colonies never refer to them as the Coercive Acts because, according to the mentality of the colonies, they're bullcrap. And because they're bullcrap, they're referred to as the Intolerable Acts. Means we will not tolerate these. So from the beginning, the colonies call them the Intolerable Acts because they're not going to tolerate them, while England calls them the Coercive Acts. So in American history, they're called the Intolerable Acts. So here's what the Intolerable Acts do. All right. First thing is Boston, which is up here. Let me not move myself over there. Boston, which is way up here in Massachusetts. This is the kind of the hub of all this. Is closed. They closed down the entire harbor, which shuts down the whole city. That's how everybody that comes to the colonies from anywhere else on Earth basically comes in through Boston. That's closed. No parking zone. You got to go somewhere else. That is going to fundamentally hurt the colonies. All right. So when that fundamentally hurts the colonies, or specifically Boston, and they're like, you don't get to open this back up until you pay us the money. Well, if your port's closed, how are you going to make money? Again, this is why they're called the Intolerable Acts. The royal governor bans town meetings. There are no town meetings anymore. Can't have them. So the right to assembly, so a lot of these things here, let's point this out. In our Constitution today in America, a lot of things that are taken away from the colonists during the Intolerable Acts are specifically guaranteed in the Constitution to make sure this stuff can't happen. This is how much they hate them. To present day, we have rules in place to make sure the Intolerable Acts couldn't happen again. The governors, you can't ban town meetings. You can't get together and meet. All right. So any British officials accused of crimes, so any soldiers, anybody who is accused of doing something shady, no longer stands trial in Britain, but or no longer stands trial in Massachusetts, but will in Britain and will be shipped away to Britain. All right. No. Then, on top of all that, make sure I'm not here, there is something called the Quartering Act. So the Quartering Act, and this is a little picture of the Quartering Act here. Man, this ticked off people. So this is a real negative venture. I imagine it's not always this awful, but it's pretty rough. So you got a wife and children here, and like this soldier's like pulling her hair. The Quartering Act says it is the responsibility of the citizens of the colonies to house troops. So when these intolerable acts get put into place, England's going to send over a whole bunch more redcoats to enforce them. Well, when they send them over to enforce them over here in the colonies, they don't have housing for them. So it is the responsibility of the colonists to house a soldier in your house if you have the ability to. If you only have one bedroom in your house, you have to give that bed to a soldier. So these soldiers are viewed as like an invading force, and you have to give up your bed in order to let the soldiers live there. And this is supposed to be like they like coming into this woman's house and like rummaging through all of her stuff, and she's like hiding her children from these evil soldiers. I'm sure this situation happened. It probably wasn't this common, but this is more the propaganda that people believed was happening and outraged the colonies when not only are you being bullied by England, but you have to house the soldiers as well. Really frustrated people. So the Intolerable Acts, like the colonies, we're very prideful people. We're like, nah, ain't going to happen. England's like, yes, it will. So there's like a standoff, like a stalemate where neither side can really do anything. So the colonies actually attempt to be the adults here. What the colonies decide to do is have a meeting. They call together all the leaders. Now, these are a lot of what our founding fathers are going to be. George Washington is going to be here. First time we've used his name. George Washington has served in the British military. He was a relatively high-ranking person in their military. He wasn't a general or anything. He moved to America, the colonies, and he in Virginia, and he had his own thing. But he is really not cool with Britain. So he shows up at this thing called the Continental Congress. In history, we call it the First Continental Congress because the second time they meet, which is called the Second Continental Congress, super famous. All right. So at the First Continental Congress, when they show up, America, now we like to be reactive and do dumb things. We're going to be the adults here. All right. The colonies are like, hey, all right, this is just going to keep getting dumber. Action, reaction, action, reaction. How about we talk to King George and let him know what the situation is? So what they do at the First Continental Congress is they sit down and they write a letter to King George, and it's called the Declaration and Resolves. What they say, they're like, all right, maybe he doesn't understand why we're salty, so let's clarify it to him. So they sit down like, all right, here's what our problem is. Here is what we would love to happen, but I'll even tell you what, we'll go one step further than that. Here's a compromise that we could do. When they go through and write the Declaration and Resolves, this is a very mature thing to do as Americans. We're like, okay, let's not have this get out of hand anymore. Let's talk to them about it and figure out where we go from here. So they write this letter and they send it to King George. When King George receives this letter from the Continental Congress, he is incredibly offended. He cannot believe that these little peon colonists believe they are superior enough to send him a letter. How dare they? Like, you don't have the right to just talk to your leader. What is wrong with you? All right? And he refuses to even read it. Won't even open it. Nope. Absolutely not. It is beneath him, the colonist. Now, this doesn't help tensions at all for a couple reasons. Number one, he literally is saying, I am better than you. In the colonies, ever since the Second Great Awakening, there's this idea of all humans are equal. The king is in no way more advanced than the people in the colonies. So him claiming that he is too good to listen to him already strike one for his side as far as the colonist view. Another important thing that comes out of this, in our Constitution today, guess what you have a right to do? Is to write your representative, to contact your government. We were so offended by this that when we create our own Constitution, we added this in. This is in the Bill of Rights. This is in the Constitution that you have the right to send a letter or a petition your representative. Because you can't just have somebody in charge that won't listen to you. You have a right to do this, whereas King George was saying you didn't. So the question is, why did England call the Intolerable Acts the Coercive Acts? Why did the colonists call the Coercive Acts the Intolerable Acts? Talked about that in detail. So if you want to pause me and write 2 sentences on that, we're going to move on. All right, 1775. 1 year away from stuff getting crazy, but it's going to start getting crazy here. All right. So let's see. All right. Show you this map here to show you what happens. Tensions are really, really high. Extremely high. So after the First Continental Congress and they refused to read the letter, they made the decision, hey, we need to start getting some militias together, because if stuff gets squirrely, we are going to have to deal with the most powerful military on earth, which is the British Army, which is absolutely fantastically powerful. So groups start going around and collecting weapons, all right? Or not really collecting, they're stockpiling weapons, all right? So you have this right here is Massachusetts, all right? You got Boston here, all right? So this whole area right here is kind of Boston, and these are the subsets. So there's 2 little towns that they're in marching distance from Boston. They're not real close, but you can get there on foot. Is Lexington, all right? The town of Lexington and the town of Concord. It's somewhat confusing when you hear about the battles of Lexington and Concord, because every state in America has like a Concord and a Lexington in it. So it's confusing. Everybody's like, oh, this happened in my state. It didn't. This happened in Massachusetts outside Boston, where the Lexington and Concord were at there. All right. So there has been stockpiling some weapons in Lexington. The colonists have, and Lexington and in Concord, where they have been getting soldiers together to train. Now, these soldiers, in quotes, are called militiamen or minutemen, meaning they're just everyday citizens in the colonies, but they have to be ready in a minute's notice to go take up arms and fight against the Redcoats, the most powerful military on earth. So they had to train, they had to have some type of organization here. Well, very little secrets can be kept. The British find out that they're stockpiling weapons here in Lexington and Concord. So in 1775, 1 year from 1776, the British are like, yeah, we're not going to let them be building an army. You're not going to, the citizens, there's no reason for them to have guns. Like, why would they have guns? We're here. We're their army. We're here to protect them. The only reason they would be wanting to stockpile weapons is to use them against us. So a group of Redcoats, 700, it's a good size army, is going to march from Boston all the way out here to Lexington and then to Concord if need be, and they're going to confiscate all the guns. The purpose here, and the reason for doing this, prevent a battle. Do not have a battle. Do not start a war. They're trying to take these guns so that a war doesn't happen. That is the mentality of the British. All right. If they don't have guns, they can't fight back. That was the logic. So these 700 men, they march out here, most powerful military on earth, march all the way out here to Lexington. They get to Lexington, all right, and this very famously is where Paul Revere rides through, the British are coming, where he probably said the Redcoats are coming, because, again, no secrets can be kept at the time. So the Lexington was alerted that the Redcoats were showing up. So guess what they did with all their guns? They took them and took off with them. So when the Redcoats show up here in Lexington, it's basically deserted. And where all the guns were held is completely empty. That all the guns have been taken. So they're like, all right, I guess go on to Concord, because I think there's a stockpile there too. As they try to leave Lexington, a skirmish breaks out, and there's like 70 colonists that open fire on the Redcoats. The Redcoats turn around, open fire. I believe 7 colonists are killed here, and I don't believe any Redcoats were killed at Lexington. But the colonists straight up opened fire on this group of Redcoats and then ran off into the woods. The Redcoats are like, what? Why would they do that? Like, how don't they know who we are, the most powerful military on earth? How dumb can they be? So they march very confidently over here to Concord, all right? When they get to Concord, and they're going to look for these weapons, all the people from Lexington and all the people from Concord have bowed up here in Concord and opened fire on the British troops. It is a straight up battle. This is entrenched. There's a bridge here, but the colonists are here completely. No, there's no uniforms. There's no nothing. They open fire on the British as they try to come across into Concord. This is another painting from the other side. 3 British Redcoats are killed and 1 colonist is killed. When the British realize they have like hunkered in, what was the entire purpose of this trip is to prevent a war. The Redcoats are like, man, if we just buffalo our way into Concord, which they probably could, they would have had to shoot and kill all those colonists, and it would have been a massacre, and that's, in their minds, absolutely going to start a war. So what the Redcoats do is they're like, no, we were trying to prevent a battle, not fight one. So once a couple of them are killed, they're like, nope, this is not what we were planning. Let's go back to Boston and recoup and figure out what we want to do. So the 700 Redcoats, or 697 Redcoats now, I guess, turn around and march back to Boston. This is a game changer in world history. You have the tiny little untrained colonial militia just turn back members of the most powerful military fighting force on earth. You talk about a confidence boost. Now, could the Redcoats have wiped out the colonists? Absolutely. But they didn't. All right? They didn't wipe them out. They turned around and they retreated back to Boston. But in the minds of the colonists, now all of a sudden they think they can do it. They're like, if we have to do it, we can stand toe-to-toe with the Redcoats and we can defeat them. This skirmish is referred to as the shot heard round the world. It's the term shot heard around the world is actually used in multiple wars, like in World War I as well in 1914. But here it's like bang, and everybody heard it. The American colonies are the first group of British colonies, and Britain owns stuff all over the world. They're the first colonies that are going to bow up to Britain. And the reason it's the shot heard around the world is all the other colonies start looking at the colony, all the other colonies around the world start looking at the American colonies, and they're like, all right, how's this going to play out? Because everybody's real interested. Can you actually stand up to Britain and have things better? So the question is, why is it such a huge deal that the Minutemen were able to turn back the British at Lexington and Concord? All right, so answer that, and we'll move on. So after this happens, the Continental Congress gets together again. And they're like, all right, get together. We just opened fire on them. How's this going to play out? So the Second Continental Congress is famous for creating the Continental Army. They're going to create the official military of the colonies. Now, these guys are going to be full-time soldiers. It's kind of a problem because they don't have any money to pay them. So they're like, yeah, you guys come on over, quit your jobs and stop farming and leave your families. Come join the military. I mean, we can't pay you or feed you or provide you with any equipment or clothing, but come do it. So it's kind of touchy. So the Second Continental Congress is very famous for creating the official Continental Army. So during the Revolutionary War, there are 2 types of armies for the colonies. You have the Continental Army, the big official one, and they're going to appoint George Washington as the leader of the Continental Army. He's really the only guy with any military experience, and he basically learned from England. So he is a competent military leader, but he's also your only real option. So George Washington gets put in charge of the Continental Army. The other type of army that's going to exist are just the militia. So while the big army will move around in the New England areas especially, the militia is typically when the redcoats show up in your hometown, the militia will come together and fight like a swarm of bees is the mentality. So the Second Continental Congress creates that army because they know they're going to fight, but they're going to present something called the Olive Branch Petition. All right. This is sent to King George, and it says, all right, King George, we saw what happened. Here's what we're going to do. If you promise to just let us do whatever we want, you take away all these taxes, you admit that we're equal with you, and that everything is fantastic, then we can keep the status quo, and we won't have to whoop up on you again. Like, needless to say, how do you think King George feels about the Olive Branch Petition? Like, oh, here's how you have peace. Back down, is what the colonists are saying to the most powerful military on earth. King George, he tears it up. He's furious. He's like, nah, it's go time now. So from this point on, King George is like, well, I'm going to wreck shop until y'all stop, bowing up to me. This is a little cartoon saying, I wish nothing but good. Therefore, whoever doesn't agree with me is a traitor and a scoundrel. So observe, this is what I think of their Olive Branch Petition. So he still thinks the colonies are less than him. And now, I don't think the Second Continental Congress expected him to accept the Olive Branch Petition, but they might have. They just did it so that they can go on record as, hey, we tried to stop a war, but in actuality, they are appointing George Washington here as the leader of the Continental Army. George Washington, and we'll talk more about him, is a very good leader. He's also enormous. He's 6'2". All right. When the average adult male is about 5'7", might have been a little shorter than that, maybe more like 5'5" to 5'6". He's 6'2", so he looks like a leader. He looks like you would think of a commander, and we'll talk more about him in upcoming lessons. So the question is, why did the Olive Branch Petition make King George so angry, and what is the difference between the Minutemen and members of the Continental Army? Alrighty, that's as far as we're going to get today. We will pick up tomorrow with Declaration of Independence.